Hi, this is Shauna, your sewing Sherpa, and we're trying this new thing called Sew Lunchables. 15 minutes to learn a different foot each Monday afternoon. And today I decided to start with a really strange but easy foot called the button foot. And it helps you sew a button on by machine. So before we sew a button on by machine, I want to show you how you sew a button on by hand, or how I sew a button on by hand. You can sew it on any way you want. And also, I want to tell you that I woke up this morning, was working on the computer, and then all of a sudden I had the craziest allergy attack. I think it's allergies, and my nose is running. So I have some Kleenex here. I'm 99.9% sure I am not contagious, but just saying. So I have pulled off about a yard of thread. Sometimes I'll do a little bit more when I'm doing a button, because instead of just putting one layer through the buttonhole, through the eye of the needle, I'm going to have 2 layers of thread. That way, every time I sew, I'm going to sew 2 stitches for 1. So, got it. That's a teeny tiny hole. I'm gonna have both of them come out. And then I have, whenever I sew, I'm actually sewing with 4 strands of thread. So that's a little bit short, you can tell now that I sew. I probably should have taken off 2 yards, but whatever. Just tying a knot in the end. This is how not to sew. And I would take my button. And of course, I want to have my knot on the back side or the inside of the garment. So I'm going to come out, and that knot is made to stop it. I know it's kind of ugly here, and straighten out some of that ugly. And I'll just trim off that extra. Then I'll go up through one of the holes. Put that button down to the fabric and go back through to the back side. And look, I've sewn around 4 times. Whew, that was fast, right? I have to keep trying that out. So with a hand sewn button, you can do something they call a shank. And this is getting a little knotted, that's okay. And that's when you come up and you give yourself a little space behind your button by wrapping around the button and creating a little shank. And so this is like really important if you're working with high loft fabrics. This is one of those things you can't do when you're working on the sewing machine. So I'll pull it back to the other side and I'll tie it off. And if I have those tails there, I'll just borrow the tails to anchor me. And, anyways, I'll pretend like that worked the second time. And then I trim that off and I've got my button there. Now, the nature of knots is eventually that's going to worry itself open. That's why you always have to like replace your buttons. Not always, but oftentimes you replace your buttons. So I've got one button in place there. Now, if I want to do it by machine, why would I want to do it by machine? It is way faster. So if I put this in place underneath my presser foot, and then I put my button on top, you can see that's kind of clumsy. I can't really see what's going on with my button. The presser foot's pushing it one way or the other. And on top of that, my feed dogs are up. And when I start doing my buttonhole, it's just going to feed everything right through. So the first thing I want to do is I want to drop my feed dogs. So these are my feed dogs. Oh, this one's got a feed dog drop on the back. I'm going to take this presser foot off so you can see it. And I'm going to flip this down and boom. Now all of a sudden my feed dogs are out of the way. On this machine over here, this is an older machine. It doesn't have a feed dog drop. What it has is a throat plate cover. So I would slide the throat plate cover on it and I would snap that into place. And that would keep my feed dogs from feeding the fabric through. So you have to have one or the other to do buttons on a sewing machine. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out my button foot. So this is the button foot. It's an odd looking little thing. It's got the bar here that snaps into place. And then it's got these little plastic grips here in the front that hold on to the button, but they're really, really short. And then it's got this kind of leveler back here, so you can have any button under here that doesn't go past that. So when you get to really large buttons, this buttonhole foot kind of, this button foot kind of builds. So I drop that on. My feed dogs are dropped. I'm going to be in a zigzag stitch. So on this is stitch number 4. And then I'm going to slide my placket or whatever I'm putting the button on. And oh, that's what I forgot, was a pencil. I wonder if I have a pencil here. I'll use a pen. I usually use a pencil, and I'll mark the spots on my fabric with just a little tiny pencil spot, so I can follow that as I'm doing my buttons. And I'll pull out a button here because I can't find that other one. I'm setting it on my, okay, so I think that's actually upside down. It is, because that's kind of like a cast shank. It gives you a little bit of extra loft. I sometimes sew on buttons upside down. This one's super cute. Set this here. Now I hand crank it the first little bit because I want to make sure that when it goes over to the left that I've got it wide enough that it's not going to hit the button. And sure enough, this is a perfect width for this one. So now I can just keep sewing it back and forth until I feel like I have it full enough. And then there's two different things I can do right now. I could just clip this off and run. You're going to end up with like a couple of little short tails. If you're really like the kind of person that wants this to look super nice on the outside, you can actually load these up onto a needle and then run them to the back side and tie them off on the back side. And then that way you don't ever have like these kind of random, like short little hairs that are sticking up. Another thing too is if you, sometimes you can pull on the back side and get those to kind of pull to the back side from the last stitch, but that doesn't always work. So that's a 2-hole button. Now here's a 4-hole button that's a little bit bigger. And it's still small enough that I can do it on the with this foot. So you have to have a really big button for this foot not to work. So again, I'm going to hand crank it and make sure I might actually make the width a little bit bigger on this one because the distance between those holes is a little bit wider. That one full, slide it slightly to my next set of buttonholes. Again, always start with hand cranking it because you never know if it's shifted and you don't want to break your needle. Then if I'm putting multiple buttons on a garment, I will just lift the foot. Sometimes I need a little extra room and slide it up to my next spot and not even worry about trimming it off. I'll just put my next button under. You pick some cute buttons. Look how cute that is. Eesh. It's like hand carved wood. I like saving buttons from like old garments and stuff before I donate them. Isn't that rude? But sometimes people use those old garments for fabric, right? Oh, error 1, put your button under your foot down. And then just kind of continue on. So that is the button foot on a computerized sewing machine, this pop on, pop off one. I have over here this vintage one. So this vintage sewing machine, so vintage white, is a little bit different in that, first of all, I had to put the snap-on foot, and the other, the snap-on throat plate. Also, it has, this is what the button foot looks like on it. It doesn't have that back stabilizer because it's all in one with this shank. So I actually have to take this shank right off. It's going to be a little tricky with this throat plate cover on. Got it. Whew. And then wrap this around and tighten this up. And now that's ready to put a button on. And where's, oh, it's on my left. That's where I kept it. Slide this under. So this throat, if you can see, the throat plate cover takes up some of the loft here. So if you have a really thick button, it's going to be more of a challenge to get it. Yeah, my hands are so dry. It's like, what's the humidity? It's like 7% today. All right. And you know what's a fun thing to do is actually go kitty cornered. So let's just say I put this on here, I drop it, I got to get into a zigzag stitch, and this one has not got very many options for a zigzag stitch. Oh, I'm going to hit it. Oh, good. Okay, we got this. The tension's really bad on this machine, and I need to do some work on it. But you can lift it and then turn it so that you've got an X, right? Again, make sure you hand crank it. And then you have one of those, I think the bobbin thread just broke. Anyways, you get the idea. Oh. And that's how you do a crisscross one. So are there any questions? Anybody have any questions on that?
No, it was great.
Oh, there we go. A little bit of muscle.
If you have a button on the back side, how you would
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, okay. Woo, we got a lot of thread here.
two buttons together.
Okay, so I understand what you're saying. There are a lot of, let me grab a couple of buttons. I have a whole bunch of buttons up here. All right. Buttons are a plague. They tend to procreate when you're not looking. I have a lot of little strap off buttons here at the studio. Okay, so sometimes you'll see on a placket or something, you'll see a button on the front and then you'll see a button on the back. And basically that's a superior way, and you'll see there's sometimes super tiny buttons on the back. That's actually a superior way of putting a button on, because if you have a button on like this, over time when you're pulling, you're going to end up with a hole in your fabric. It's like it kind of wears a hole in your fabric, especially if it's under a lot of stress. But if you have a button on the back side, what happens is that it's pulling on the other button. So you're not actually going to be pulling a hole through your fabric. You're going to be pulling on that button, and it's a super stable way of doing it. But so you'll oftentimes find them on like those cuff links where you've got a lot of things going on. So to do that, I don't know that there's a really good way to do it on machine. I mean, if I were going to do it on machine, because I had to do a lot of them, I would probably put the back button on first so I could see where the holes were. And then I would set the top button over, and again, hand crank it so that I knew I was getting through both of the holes on both sides, and then run it a little bit. But you're looking at quite a bit of loft for that. And that's probably why they don't do buttons like that anymore, because it's a perfect candidate for hand sewing. So, and how about you? You have any questions? No? All right. Anything from you, Nancy?
No, thank you so much. It was very informative.
Oh, good, great. Well, if you come up with any questions as in the future or whatever, we'll just kind of put them on the, we're going to have this on the YouTube, and I guess you can, in the comments, you can ask questions and we can answer them there, because yeah, there's a lot of fun things, like a lot of different types of buttons out there. Ones with shanks, of course, you have to do by hand. There's no way to do it on a sewing machine, but yeah.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nancy.
Take care. See you on the 11th.
I'll see you on the 11th. Okay.